Hello and welcome to this edition of We Debate. I'm Joe Munene. Now, the scourge of colonialism inflicted pain and economic deprivation on many African societies. But decades after gaining independence, many African countries have continued to struggle to lift themselves out of poverty and underdevelopment. This in contrast to the prosperity of developed countries. There are those who believe that Africa's struggles are not accidental and that the colonial era was simply replaced by neocolonialism, which employs more tactful, less crude systems and structures that still disadvantage the African nations. Neocolonialism, they argue, is what has kept Africa poor. Is this really the case?
The debate motion for tonight, let it be resolved. Neocolonialism is the reason for Africa's continued poverty and underdevelopment. Our debaters for tonight are, on the affirmative side of the debate we have, Professor Fred Ogola, leadership and political strategist. On the negative side of the motion we have, Ndu Oko, a communication specialist.
Professor Ogola, Ndu Oko, welcome to this debate session. The motion before us, neocolonialism, is the reason for Africa's continued poverty and underdevelopment. We are going to start off on the affirmative side. Professor Ogola, you are arguing on the affirmative of this motion. Ndu, you are in opposition on the no side. We will start with 1 minute of opening remarks. Thereafter, we will go to your main body of presentation. You will have 5 minutes to give a presentation. After the second presentation by Ndu, we will have an opportunity for a rebuttal, where you can then respond to the arguments posed by your opponent. Now, as part of the format of this debate, we have a panel of jurors.
And on the jury panel, we have Juror 1, Dr. Frida Karani, Miss President 2 candidate. Juror 2, Tony Kwalanda, civic leader and broadcast journalist. Juror 3, Nerima Wako, executive director, Siasa Place.
Prior to the start of this debate, we polled the jury members on their position on this motion, and 3 out of 3 of the jury members are in support of the motion that yes, neocolonialism is the reason for Africa's continued poverty and underdevelopment. So Ndu, you have a gigantic task ahead of you to sway the jurors to your side of these debates, and I'm sure you're up to it. At the end of the debate, we will assess and see how that transition of the juries has been achieved. So to start us off, we start with your opening statement. Professor, you have 1 minute.
Africa is not poor. Rather, she is underdeveloped due to colonialism perpetuated by neocolonialism. 34 years ago, that is the year 1488, Europeans discovered the route to Africa through the south coast. And I believe that was the time the seed of African underdevelopment was planted, and now it's just only being perpetuated. So like national prosperity, which we all aspire for, poverty is not inherited, but it's created. And therefore it means poverty is man-made. So who made it? It must have been made because whatever comes to be must be made to be. So this was made by colonialism, and now is being perpetuated through neocolonialism. Look here, foreign leaders, especially former colonialists, are trying to outdo each other on their diplomatic war in Africa by visiting so much. And I believe that interest what I call neocolonialism, which is affecting Africa. It is self-interest that we call colonialism, and therefore these former colonies are not coming here to defend, but they are not coming here to capture Africa. In fact, His Excellency, the President of Kenya, William Ruto, talked about state capture. I believe this is his next fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your opening statement. Ndu, over to you.
Neocolonialism is not a new concept. It is not a word that came about when independence had been fought for by the many countries across the African continent. It is something that has been here for some time. I believe Kwame Nkrumah talked about it being the last stage of imperialism. So those upon which colonialism had been meted upon also had not been given any rest. We talk about colonialism having ended, we talk about the colonialists having left, and my argument is that they never left, but independence was fought for. So the question is, what was being fought for? Who was fighting? To whom were the reins of leadership being handed over to at the time that colonialism ended? With this notion that the reason why Africa is underdeveloped, are we truly saying that we do not have apt leaders who can take up the mantle of responsibility and remove hundreds of millions of people from the shackles of poverty because there's an overarching hand of foreign nations? What are we saying? That independence was fought for in vain. Blood was shed for nothing. Independence was fought for so that we could continue to allow the arm of colonialism bear its heavy hand on our heads. I say no. I say leadership is important on this African continent. Neocolonialism, in as much as it is in existence, is going to continue to be an excuse for our underdevelopment.
Thank you. Strong opening statements there. We now circle back to you, Professor. Your main presentation, you have 5 minutes.
I thought it was 7 before, but let me continue by saying that, first of all, what is neocolonialism? We realize neocolonialism is the indirect reimposition by the rulers who are colonialists, and they can use even Africans to go through it. So neocolonialism is not the Western color. Neocolonialism is a concept that even we have some African leaders, the ones who took freedom, to be actually the one being agents of that neocolonialism. Remember, when colonialists were here, there are some chiefs in Kenya who were colonialists, and they are called nobles, and they became the African elite, who are now being used to impress or impose and actually impoverish their own communities. Examples are too many even to mention. So first, I want to say Africa was not born poor, was not meant to be poor, and God did not create poverty, and therefore Africa is only underdeveloped. So the first thing to put context here, I'll take a country called DRC Congo. DRC is the 11th world's most populous nation. DRC natural resources around $24 trillion. It's Africa's largest producer of copper and the world's largest producer of cobalt. But you know what? Because of neocolonialism, Africa, DRC Congo is number 175 in terms of Human Development Index. This is amazing, because it is because of colonialism. How have they done it? Of course, they implanted the seeds of colonialism because they took colonialists took the most critical resource, which is human resource and natural resources. And from my perspective, from an economics point of view, any nation in the world is either rich because they have rich human resource, for example, Mauritius can tell you, or they can be very rich because of natural resources. If you go to the developed nations, UAE is because of oil, Russia, you know why Russia is rich, natural resources, and Ukraine. Now, when you come to other countries like Germany and Asian tigers, they had the best and brightest people, and that they use to grow the economy using human resource. So if someone enslaves your human resource and takes your natural resources, you would tell me how we are going, and they hold this to date. So these Asian tigers give us an example. The second thing is, for more than 45 decades, which is over 450 years, Africans were denied the opportunity to rule themselves. And according to Darwin's theory, whatever is not put to use disappears. That's why Africans are men, they say men don't have tails, because our tails disappeared. Because they found when they had a kinship system of government, what they took is that they took away and imposed their own system of rule like democracy, which remains foreign, and we are struggling with it. And in fact, in the words of Kofi Annan, which is good to read because an African says, no one is born a good citizen. No nation is born a democracy. Rather, both are processes that continue to evolve over time. So my belief is that had we been left with our own kingship system, it could have been evolved to an advanced version of African leadership that we understood, and therefore we could have been able actually to defeat this underdevelopment. The third thing is that underdevelopment is found in the structure of colonial and colonizers. Why am I saying so? Between poverty and colonialism, which one came first? Of course, you know, there was no poverty in pre-colonial era because of our system of ruling. There are men, women with their work, youths had their work, everyone in the community had their stuff. No one owned land. Land belonged to everybody, so there was no landlessness. There was no unemployment. They imposed on us their system of doing things. There was nothing like mental illness. We are talking about mental health because everybody was supported and was accepting the community, so no one says, I have no mother, I have no father. They introduced wages as a way for us to work for them and become slaves of them. And these wages still continue because I have to work and pay taxes to the country, and these taxes are to pay debt, which is a foreign debt. So we find that was a big problem. Again, changes in authority and social cohesion was a problem because they brought what is called the urban educated, who became the urban elite, who captured the institution of the police, the finance, education, and now for you to be president of this country or any other country in Africa, you must also capture those institutions. Even the laws, the foreign laws were given to us. The British system of law is the one we use here. And you are telling me they left. What did they leave with? They left everything here, and we are leaving everything they left. So they didn't leave. You look at the issue of institutional capture by the president here again, I reiterate that very clearly. They left us with the financial system. So central bank has to work according to the UN, the foreign banks. If they don't comply, there's no money that flows. So financial institution. You find taxes. We are being taxed. Now we are finding that our GDP to debt to GDP is 75%, which means that when you take a loan from a bank, you begin to work for the bank. So 85% of African effort is actually to settle our foreign debt, which means we are working for foreigners, not ourselves. And those are some institutions to keep us poor. Security, which is the police, also captured. Interpol police are under control, Kenyan police. You can go to all many things you find that is important. UN Security Council has 15 members. Most of them are foreigners. Africa has 1 seat, which we have been working for years, yet we deserve 2 if we talk about GDP and population. So I'll finish by saying that if you look at this thing in clarity, Amartya Sen said that economy is freedom. If you have no money, you have no freedom. Like now, if you have no money, you can't tell me you're leaving your mother's house. So even if they gave us independence, they kept us in control by controlling our pockets. If you give me 20,000 shillings and I'm working with 20 people, I'll tell them to go anywhere, they'll follow me because I'm holding them by their pocket. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor. It's about the economy. It's about the financing. All right. Do your 5 minutes presentation, and then you respond to each other's arguments.
Thank you. As we look at this issue of neocolonialism, again, we are looking at a deeper entrenchment of what initially was there as colonialism. I think it would be one of the probable highest mistakes that we could make to absolve our current leaders, our current governments, our current legislation, our current judiciary, our current media from the responsibility of entrenching the independence that was so hardly fought for by so many countries on this continent. Let's look at Ethiopia, a country never colonized by anybody, but still is on one of the lowest indexes when it comes to the poverty of its people. Who perpetuates underdevelopment in Ethiopia? Who perpetuates underdevelopment when we look at the county level, when you look at a country like Kenya? When you walk into the county and your people cannot afford medicine, are we talking about a colonialist system of government that's so entrenched, so much so that a county CEC will not do what they need to do to make sure that its people have the medicine that they need? When we look at when we look at money that should go to counties, do we talk about the fact that a higher hand has pressed down on the necks of local government? Is that what we're looking at? When we look at money that has been budgeted for certain government projects, and we're not looking at how they've actually done the work, as opposed to the money that disappeared, are we looking at the hand of neocolonialism today? What is the reason why they come and say they want to make sure that development projects actually make sense on the African continent? Because they were not there before. Why do we want to continue absolving our leaders the responsibility that they have to actually lead the people and to glorify the independence that they fought for in the very beginning? We cannot do that. Who says that we should lie like a dog on the ground and say, yes, please come and develop me and give me your ways of government and give me your money and I will do whatever it is that you say? and this is my issue today, that in as much as neocolonialism is a factor in the independence, or rather in the underdevelopment of many nations, it is not the reason. They came, they colonized many African countries. They still come today and offer you because they know that there is something that they seek here. Who says that the people of DRC, for example, as examples have been given, who says that the people of DRC who know what their resources are have to continually give sway? And I'm telling you today that there is a willing buyer and that there's a willing seller. That the people who come from these countries, the rulers of the great G8, the G7, even as far as the G20, once they make their ways to the shores of Africa once again, they're having conversations with African leaders. They don't come and have a free-for-all in how they will operate. They're in bed with somebody. Somebody's allowing it. Somebody's having these conversations. Somebody is acquiescing to their demands. And that is what I'm saying cannot be continued to allow to happen. Who is responsible for forward thinking when it comes to leadership? Who sits at the table and makes these contracts? Who sits at the table and agrees to these things on behalf of the hundreds of millions of Africans still till today? If the reason why we're giving for underdevelopment and continuance of poverty, why do we look at countries that have never been colonized? And why do they continue in this ambit of poverty? Why does that continue to happen? We cannot use the factors as the reasons. It is as a man who is running a race. The wind factor plays heavily in whether he will lose or win, but it is not the determinant on whether he will cross the finish line. How do you get to that point where you are saying all things are working in tandem? We give the examples of those who refuse to the whims of neocolonialism. Libya was a country that would be able to compare with any of the first world countries today, making sure that their people went to school until the age of 18 for free, making sure that they bought fuel at a very low grade. They knew that their crude was what the people of the West wanted, but they said, no, our people must develop first. There was nothing that was not offered to their hand, but Gaddafi stood his ground and said, no, let us develop our country, let us build our roads, let us send our people to school. And then what did he become? Persona non grata for the globe. And we know what ended there. Why was he able to stand his ground? Why was he? They came, they made the offer, he refused, and he was labeled. Western media made him look like something out of the ground because he stood for development in his country. And for sure you can bet that the offers were made. When they come, must you agree? When they bring an alternate system of education for you, look at Rwanda today. Rwanda stands as one of the only countries in sub-Saharan Africa that has turned its public-private education system on its head. So much more that private schools today are closing with the would-be education system that has been offered to them from the West. And they have said what? They've said, no, we will develop it ourselves. Today, public schools have overrun private schools in Rwanda, and they're shutting down because leadership has decided we will not continue to lie in the bed of this excuse of neocolonialism today.
All right, thank you, Ndu. Professor Ogola, are you convinced at this early stage of the debate to cross the floor?
I think far from it, and if you hear her concluding remarks, looks like she's crossing over, especially from the examples. First of all, I reiterate that this is false independence because I told you that you cannot leave your parents' house when you are still relying on their paycheck. That's why we leave when we were 20, 18, thereabout. And economy is a source of freedom. If you give me money, you give me freedom. Even the Bible, the prodigal son asked for his father's wealth first before he said he was free. So the fact that the global economy is still being controlled by these people, we are not free. So he said our leaders are free to do what they do. No, they are being led from the West. And then he talks about Ethiopia not being colonized, but it was neocolonized because of the fact that if you look at the financial architecture, even the dollar effect, the euro effect, we are not living in your own cocoon anymore. You live in a global village, so it's being determined. Ethiopia don't live in a vacuum. So all institutions in Ethiopia, call it military, police, is being controlled by the Western institutions. You have no seat in the UN Security Council. And you have no say. You have to comply. Even if Ethiopia wants to go for war with Kenya, the UN Security Council has to give them permission. Can you imagine they're telling us we're free? I'm sure we are only free to talk, but we're not free actually to determine our future. And then another thing is that when, as he said, when the US head of state lands here, I'm sure you are here when Obama landed here, all of a sudden our security system were given to them. They were handed over the airspace, the land, the sea. Our telecoms were disrupted. You could not pick a call. Is this freedom? Gentlemen, if we do say we are free Africans, I'm sure we are the worst slaves, if at all we believe, because I'd rather be a free person than to say that I'm a well-fed slave. So at the moment, Africans are just well-fed slaves. They are taking all dangles from the West, and they take it seriously. Libya, the example you gave, how far did Gaddafi survive? He was overthrown. And who overthrew him? The West. Him. So how free are you, even not to determine your own leadership? If they disagree with the philosophy of the West, you are done. Rwanda, for example, is not free because Rwanda is having a lot of control from the West. I see many Africans saying they are free. They put in a suit like me, which is a British suit, and they use British accent, American accent, to really say colonialism are out of there and they are free. Why don't you stand here and defend yourself in your mother tongue to each other? Why is this debate not done in Luo or in, for example, in Hausa language or something? I believe that the fact that these people had come to us, let's accept that neocolonialism is dealing with us, because the first thing to change is to accept that it is my situation. So I'm requiring my sister Ndu to first of all believe that your situation is. There's what we call a grow model. The grow is goal. What is our goal? Is to be developed, isn't it? The second thing is R is reality. What's our reality? Our reality is that colonialism has impeded our structures. If we don't see it, we can't change it. Then the second thing, alternative. Which option do we have? Either to stay and agree with them, or stay in denial like Ndu is doing, or at least change something. And then last, what is the will? What are we willing to pay for? What price can we pay to overcome this situation? So I'm asking you that by denying us this chance, and by believing that we are free, it is actually a false freedom. And let me tell you very clearly that there are so many scholars who have written about lack of freedom in Africa. In fact, you heard about Not Yet Uhuru, is a book well published. I guess maybe I would urge my colleague Ndu to read this book. What Not Yet Uhuru is, at the moment, to become president in Kenya, in Africa, you have to go to the US. Look at what was happening when our leaders went to UK for burial. What did they do? They simply were put in a bus. Of course, it is fair, but why did some people come in their own motorcade? Joe Biden arriving in 60 cars. Then they talk about climate change. They tell Africa about how we need to cut our carbon emissions so that we can grow. And they use the very carbon emission to grow their economies. We are being controlled in any single decision we make. IMF has laundered money to Kenya. They told you now you cannot do subsidies. You have to raise your taxes. So what we are seeing here is you're being told, do this. Borrow money from the Western powers. That money has been repatriated from your very country. For example, the minerals in DRC, the one I mentioned, they are being taken from DRC and there. In Nigeria, they export oil, then they buy oil from these people. Is that freedom? Why don't you process your own oil and do your own stuff? So what I'm trying to say, Africa, wake up, my dear. We need to wake up and see and smell the coffee and see that it is not good, it is bad. And I want to end by saying there are two ways of looking at life. There's what we call pessimism, and there's what we call optimism. Optimism is what my colleague Ndu is saying. You are inside a net, mosquito net, and there's a mosquito in your net. It's going to bite you. Then you say, let me sleep. Hopefully the mosquito will die. That's what she's trying to tell us. But pessimists will say, if I don't wake up and smash this mosquito, it will bite me. And that's what I'm trying to say as an African. Let us look at this as a pessimist approach, because pessimism just preach hope and the Bible. And Africa, hope is not your strategy. It has never taken any country anywhere. Let's be deliberate. Thank you.
All right, Ndu, your rebuttal to what you've heard so far?
Well, I must say I'm very glad that the examples that Prof has given have basically buffered my argument. I really especially like the one of the man in the mosquito net, because then what that does is that it tells you there's a mosquito that is constantly sucking and drawing your blood. And you realize that you must do something about it. That you must either sit up, leave the net, you must sit up, squash the mosquito, or at least spray the mosquito to try and get rid of it. And this is my argument. Let us move from whether neocolonialism exists or not. I think we are already past that. It exists. It is here. We see the effects of it day after day. It is not the reason for underdevelopment in Africa. It is a factor. It plays out very clearly. The reason for underdevelopment cannot be put into one box. And I am saying the same things that we are talking about. Your leaders going to pay penance and to seek authority or to seek acquiescence on going to then get a seat in government tomorrow. You give an example of Nigeria. Nigeria had 3 oil refineries in the 80s and were able to refine, again, the smooth crude that is the darling of the Western nations, because then you don't have to do so much to refine it. 3 oil refineries in the time of 20 years had gone under because of corruption, because of mismanagement. Where was the hand of the West playing in Babangida's government when that was being run to the ground? Today, they have to take the crude that is drilled in Nigeria, send it out, bring it back in. I thank you for that example because it is a brilliant one of what I'm talking about today. What example will you give and say, well, okay, you have 3 oil refineries in Nigeria, you run them to the ground, you take the money that is supposed to and line your pockets with it, so much so that people have bundles of money sitting in their houses until the economic agencies do not even know what to do on how to fight corruption. Are those the things that we're talking about today? We're talking about an entrenched system of government that is run by individuals. Live, blood-thumping, heart-beating individuals, human beings. They've come again. Maybe some would say they never left. But are we lying down and saying, just because you have said this and you have the powerful hand of the Western nations, that we are going to lie down and take it lying down? And that is my problem today. That we do not look at the issues as to why undevelopment really happens. We can look at the big picture of the nation, but the granular matters. The man who coined the phrase that the devil is in the details knew exactly what he was talking about. Because you get down to the county level. Why did Turkana get education 40 years after independence? Why did that happen? Why are we looking at a situation today where many have said the leaders of DRC Congo, for example, continue to shake hands at the back door with the Belgians and the French and the people who continue to colonize them till today? Is it that they do not see the millions of people who are suffering? Is it that they do not see that the education system in the country needs to get better? Is it that they do not see the drones of people who continue to leave the streets of Kinshasa every day and land in Paris? You think they do not know? Where is their hand when it comes to making sure that education is working at the micro level? And I am saying it is here with us. But what are we doing about it? If we do not stand up and face the reality in the face, then we will go back to the 50s and the 40s when they came and did as they liked. When they took our land and they took our children and we gave them our religion. We took our religion for that. Why? Why do we continue to look and say, okay, they're coming again, but we're just going to lie down and allow them to take it, and that is my problem.
I'll be given a chance to correct.
And that is my problem.
You know, let me tell you that one of the most important evidence in any academic or philosophical argument is called falsification evidence. And let me say that by saying that first there's what they call confirmatory evidence, which you can confirm the earth, the sun rises from the east and sets in the west. Since we were born, it's true, isn't it? One single day the sun will rise from west to go to the east, no one will say, on a single instance, that the sun rises from east and sets in the west. And you're falling prey to that because you are telling us what ought to be. We ought to, but we have to start with the reality. What's the reality? What is, like you said, that neocolonialists are keeping us poor. That's what is. What ought to be is that now we need to change that narrative.
The reason why neocolonialism has kept Africans poor until, and this, we're saying the same thing if you want to look at it right now. The reason why this poverty has continually been, which you have agreed that it is a factor. But I am saying another factor that plays in here very clearly is that you look at this thing, it's coming for you. An 18-wheeler is coming down the road, you look at it, you watch it, and you're saying it's getting closer and closer. And you say, now I am beginning to sweat. Should you jump out of the way or should you stand in the road and let this thing take you out?
Which chance do you have?
And this is my question, and that's the thing. Because I believe it was Bob Marley who said that we are still in this state of mental poverty. It's mental. This is not physical. This is not taking the money, as you said, out of the bank. This is mental. To think that really these examples that they're giving, these offers that they're giving, that we have to take them. And that is the problem. That we are stuck in that mindset where you say, it is absolutely necessary for me to hear what this man or this woman woman is offering. The way they came and they offered their education. They came and they offered their religion. They came and they offered their system of government and their system of education.
Let me make my point.
And now we are saying, because they've brought it, we must take it. And that's ludicrous.
Let me make my point here by saying
Yes,
that
Professor.
by accepting reality first is important. And let me talk about with life example. I am born to 11. I'm in a family of 11 kids. My mother was just a housewife, and my father was a catechist. He earned 1,500 a month. To bring up 11 kids is not easy. If I accepted that that is the reality, I had to look for a solution, and that's what I did, because I got my scholarship throughout, and I'm not a professor out of school fees for my parents. If I was to say that I think we are okay, we would still be okay. I don't want to have okay life. And I went to look for a solution, but first accepting my reality, because my cousin told me, Fred, your last school is primary school. He made me realize that that's the truth. If I had to rely on my parents' income, I would have just had my last school in primary school. So I want to confirm also.
This is exactly what, thank you very
No,
much. This is exactly what I'm
it's
saying.
not exactly.
Because now you can imagine, I hope and I would pray that the folks who watch this debate are in a position to put you in a place of government would actually take it very seriously. Because you are the one who has said just now, you have seen the situation. You know that that is the reality. But did you sit on your laurels? Did you sit on your laurels and say, I'm going to allow this whole thing encapsulate
I wanted to understand
you decided that you were going to do something about it.
I want you to understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
If you say it's not the reason, if you believe it's not the reason, you are avoiding to see reality. When I saw this is the reason, then I did something about it. So I'm calling upon Africans and African leaders to see the reason. It's called fishbone analysis. Cause of causes, causa causarum in Latin. What is the cause of causes? The cause of causes begins from there. If we don't remove the cause, the effect continues. And by trying to deny by saying it is not the reason, it's just an excuse, then what is the reason? Because if you go for a reason by saying it is our lack of mindset, these guys are not free, and they are not free to do what they want to do, because why are they not free? Money.
All right.
When I'm controlling your pocket, I'm controlling everything. In fact, in any household, when a man has more income than a woman, a man is in control. And the opposite is the same. Even I am the sixth born in my family. I seem to earn more than others, seemingly. They call me daddy. I'm not a daddy. I've been installed as a little elder, too young, because others don't have the money. So money is important, and the Western people are giving you the money that is financing you. And therefore, you are not free. Until we change the global financial architecture of the world, others are just piecemeal solutions to what is the core of the problem, which is neocolonialism.
So we will take a break at this point. In the second half, we'll have cross-examination, plus the role of the jurors will come in. We'll get questions from the jury team. For now, we take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the debate. A quick reminder for you to engage with us on this debate motion on our KTN Home social media pages. We start this second half with cross-examination. We'll start with you, Ndu. Your opportunity to ask one question of the proposing side.
All right. Prof. Gola, I'm interested to hear, based on your summations, what would be the reason as to why we see at the micro level, within many countries on the continent, that development still does not happen, and where does the hand of neocolonialism play in that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that the main question for this is that we are not free beings. We live in a global world, and the global architecture, financial, security, structure is controlled by the West. The language we use, the education system that we have gotten, it is not giving us freedom, because once I'm born and I'm 40 and I speak English, I cannot be free from that. And this is not something that I can say that I inherited from my mother's womb. I was created like that. It was put in me by these people, because the English system was there. all the education system. Look at Tanzania that tried to use their own Ujamaa system, whereby they were learning chemistry in Swahili. If you go to Tanzania in the global competition in the world in academia, Tanzania suffer because if you learned chemistry in Swahili, and now you are doing a lab test in London, clearly you are in trouble. If you are imposed to a certain ways of thinking, because we are not free, because even the way of thinking, even your framework of thought, even the thinking itself, it's already colonial. And that very colonialism that has been implanted in your head becomes a problem now. If you look at how you treat people in a country, you have known what interests are. I'm told corruption was not in Africa before. Corruption was brought here because when they came, the people brought some goodies to Africans leaders, so the African leaders discovered, kumbe, it is possible that people should bring gifts to me. So gift-giving culture was actually brought. For us, we had different ways on how to reward each other in economy. So I'm saying we are not allowed even to grow. For me, the biggest disadvantage Africans have is that for 45 decades, we never led ourselves. We were led by somebody else. How do you even catch up? And you are leading according to their script. So according to me, it's a very essential question, and I'll end by saying there are two things to look here. In Karl Marx's words, there's what called superstructure, and then infrastructure. Now, the way even this hotel where we are works, the way this hall is constructed, starts from the thinking, what do we need to do here? That's the superstructure. Now, the building becomes infrastructure. Why are we driving on the left side of the road? It is infrastructure developed for the superstructure that is Western. If you go to any African countries, whether you do left or right, it depends on who colonized you. You are not even free to drive on which side of the road you want. So to change the infrastructure in Nairobi so that we can drive on the right, how much will it cost us? So I'm saying the amount of resources we need, even to be free, is not possible. And British used our colonizing Kenya, took money, minerals from here, and built their sewer system in London. So if you go to London, 100% sewer system. Nairobi, we only have 3% of Nairobi. In fact, Kenya, under sewer system. To get a sewer system like London, we need to go and colonize another country so that we can get the same. How do you even start arguing? And then you are in debt from them. So I'm trying to say these deep-sitting issues which are there are so serious that what we need to do is to accept and leapfrog and do things like Safaricom, for example. We don't have to build a telecom lines, but what we need to do now is to leapfrog using a phone. But before accepting our reality that this is what is hitting us, if I go to the example of mosquito, if you believe that this mosquito is in the net because my wife did not close the windows early, you will stay there forever, the mosquito will bite you, but that is your business. Wake up, know the problem, do root cause analysis, and reach there. In fact, the reason why we are where we are the people who argue like you do by believing that our problem sits elsewhere, but not what we see. It is the elephant in the room.
All of this time you've been saying that the problem is neocolonialism. It's sitting in the minds and hands of others who have brought it here. And this is what if I have to say one thing for the remaining minutes that I have, I am saying that we are looking at this problem in the face and not doing anything about it.
No,
that is the issue. Because we say, they've brought it to us. We cannot do anything about it. We are shackled.
No,
we cannot do anything about it.
The question was
we cannot move forward. And my question actually, which incidentally has really not been answered at this point, is then if that is the case, why at the very granular level where we don't see the presence every day, can we not see development happening? Why don't we see things being implemented? Why don't we see things
my main point is that we have not accepted the problem, the cause of the problem, and you are one of that problem because you have not accepted that this is the problem.
I think
we are attacking, we are chasing the effect, not chasing the cause of the problem.
We continue to lean on excuses that absolves us from an inherent responsibility
the context,
to get
for example,
done.
at the county level, the micro level. And yes, there's development happening at the county level, but there are also many challenges. I think the question Ndu is asking is, would you also blame the challenges at that micro level on neocolonialism?
Yes, because the mindset, I'm talking about the superstructure, the thinking behind the whole thing. And then denying that we are free. You know, when you are not free and you are believing you are free, you can't seek your freedom. And that's where Ndu is my main problem with her. Forget about my arguments.
The acceptance.
If you don't accept this is my problem, like I said, if I don't get scholarship, if I believe that my parents will wake up as a miracle, optimists, that one day my father will become rich and pay my school fees. I knew he was poor. I knew that he was genuine, but he couldn't afford it.
And
So
on that note, if
my
you don't
brother
recognize,
opposite
if you
thought
don't recognize
differently.
your responsibility, if you don't recognize
what you
your
are not.
own responsibility in your own progress and development, then we have an even bigger problem
And your
than
freedom,
neocolonialism.
responsibility cannot come before you're free. So first of all, freedom with responsibility.
True.
But you can't have responsibility without freedom. And I think there are two sides of a coin. And
So your case is there's no freedom.
we are not free, and let us accept that first.
Okay.
Me and you are here, we are not free. And when the more we deny that, it is essentially the problem.
Stops us from finding the true
Yes.
solution to it.
Yes.
Okay. So, Professor, your opportunity to ask a question. of,
My
Ndu.
question is that because I believe so strongly that neocolonialism is the reason, not a factor, the reason, if you deny that this is not the reason, then what is the reason?
Okay, I mean, it's brilliant because I think now what has been given is an opportunity to look at the very several issues. I think that we still continue to hold on to the coattails of what was brought. I think that the thoughts, the actions, the requests, the almost essential demand on African countries continues to be something that we are blind to. That we refuse to realize that there's still something here that they want. They've seen the value, we don't see the value. They've seen, we don't see. And here we are continuing to say that, you know, it's because they keep coming. It's because they keep meddling. It's because they keep demanding. It's because they keep asking and requesting. That is why we cannot move
In fact,
forward.
when you say we are blind,
I would like to answer the question.
when you say you're
I would
blind-
like to answer the question. I actually am not.
Just go to the blind. When you say
If-
we are
if-
blind, we are blind to see the truth.
Would you ask?
And
Would you allow me to answer the question
Yes,
that you've
yes.
asked, or would you like to?
I'll
answer your
just
own
clarify
question?
that the blindness you're talking about is not to see the truth.
Actually, it's what I'm speaking of, so I'd like to
Yes.
answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So, when we talk about not being able to see, they see what you have. They know the potential that lies here. Why can't we pick up on that potential and use it? How many examples do we have that policies that are used or that have come up from Kenya are sitting gathering dust on many shelves until tomorrow? Who was the person that did not allow the freedom of African countries to come up with those policies? Who sat on their neck and said, I'm not going to allow you to think? And yet, they came up with policies that are world-changing in terms of what can happen. But then we say implementation is the problem. Who sat on the neck of Africans when they're writing these policies? Who did not allow them their freedom to think and put them down? Who did not allow the freedom of the person who sits in Silicon Valley today, who, by the way, is a Kenyan, who came up with some of these things? Did somebody sit on their neck and say they cannot do it?
Joe, I
The
like
people
her
who
talking
sit-
about
the
the
people-
freedom.
I
Let me
wish I
just
could answer the
interject.
question that he's
I
asked
like
me.
her
It would be
saying
really nice
the
if I could
freedom
answer the
too,
question.
and what I'm denying is that we are not having it. So before
So your case is there's no freedom
We are
to do
not
those
free.
things.
And I
Yeah.
am saying
Okay.
that there is freedom,
even
there is
the political
freedom.
debate we had in Kenya here, there was no question about how neocolonialism, anybody's policy on
I can
neocolonialism.
understand your uncomfortable.
Because the elephant is in
Prof,
the room,
I can
no one
understand.
wants to talk about it,
Yes, this
and the
is
elephant continues to be in the room.
And I can
Okay.
understand your
Do your
uncomfortability.
closing
Sure, I can
response.
understand your uncomfortability with this, Prof, and I can see that. And it's true. It is really uncomfortable to have this conversation. I get it. And I think that's the problem, that we don't want to face this thing and say it's uncomfortable.
So face it.
That's exactly, face it and say that there is something you can
All
do, but we
right.
choose not to do it.
Thank you. Now we'll cross the floor. We will get questions from the jury team. We'll start with Dr. Frida Karani. 2 questions. Just indicate to whom you are directing each of the questions. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. We definitely have very good debaters. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Professor Ogola,
Yes.
you told us a very personal story, and you really made us really relate with the issue of neocolonialism about scholarship. But I want you to paint us a picture of neocolonialism versus international relations, considering the side that you are on, And of course, marry that with your story, your very beautiful story about the scholarship, because I want to know where you got the scholarship. And if it was foreign scholarship, are you underdeveloped? Madam Du, paint us a picture of research and neocolonialism. The leaders who stood up against neocolonialism, what has been their basis? Maybe neocolonialism is an individual decision. Is it a structural issue? What is this elephant in the room? Where is the tail? Where are the ears? Where are the legs? Paint us that picture so that we are able to see it. Thank you.
All right. We'll start with Professor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frida. A very interesting question indeed. First of all, let me say that, when you ask someone by a question by a senior, you attempt a response. You can't say you'll give an answer. So just allow me to attempt a response, because I'm sure it's a question that needs more research even. But to just be clear, the difference between colonialism and international relations is that if it's international relations, we should be equal partners on the table. I've given you that we have 15 members of UN Security Council. Africa has been fighting to have a seat in that council. Imagine France has a seat as a single country. US has a seat as a single country. If I calculated Africa's population, total GDP, we should have at least 2 seats by all matrices that I've mentioned. Yet we have one, but one that disappears after some years because they change them. You understand? We are not even a permanent seat. There are only five permanent ones. And they have veto power. So how are we equal on the table? Freedom must have equality. So that's how I'm denying the very premise that we are out of it. But what I'm trying to suggest with my argument is that we should not fight neocolonialism. But we can use neocolonialism to achieve our end. What we want is success and development. I didn't wake up and start blaming my other uncles who are well off because my cousin, the one who told me, in my family, we are doomed. But I used the same system to get to what I want to achieve. That's why I gave you the GROW model. What's my goal? What's my reality? What are my alternatives? So in this neocolonialism versus international relations, what is Africans' alternatives? Let us not suggest what is not within our hands. In decision making, you make decisions in your sphere of control. I could sit down and study hard in my books, and I could get scholarship with EU. Whether EU are colonized or not, me, I'm not interested to overturn EU. My role is to achieve development for myself, my family, and for my village, and for my country. I'm not interested in who is the superpower. Now, the president of this country can go to EU and come and say, I brought for you 50,000 vaccines. Vaccines, then we buy syringes from the West. So you're being cheated. I'm giving you free vaccines, but they want us to buy syringes and all consumables for vaccine. We are not seeing the elephant in the room.
Yeah. All right. You had another question?
Yes, for Madame Du.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So looking at the research aspect and saying that, African leaders coming together for those who were able to fight in the face of this. And I think one brilliant example that we can continue to give, if we look at what happened in the country of Libya, and I'll continue to give that as an example. Gaddafi was the man who said, let us come up as like minds and form the Organization of African Unity. In his mind, what he knew was certain things could happen. That there would be economic freedom, that there would be freedom from the shackles of a government which, for many, did not make sense. But one of the things that we can look at, if we actually read the opening pages of the OAU agreement in the 80s, was that they realized that the point from which they were coming did not make sense. They knew that the borders of the countries through which they lived, in many cases, had been mishmashed. But they said, with this which we have, what can we do as individual nations to make sure that we work on our economies, that we work on development, that we work on the education of our people with the resources that we have? And that was one thing that I underlined. With the resources that we have, nothing about external help or aid, nothing about leaning on somebody else, but that they saw it and they said, yes, this can actually happen. And it was on those grounds, with brothers like Kwame Nkrumah and others, that the Organization of African Unity was formed. Not the puppet AU that we have today, but the original idea of the OAU which was formed. Before the felling of Gaddafi, walk into the streets of Libya. Walk into the streets of Libya where you have paved roads for miles, where the education system was so solid that people went until the age of 18 and paid not a cent. Whether it did not matter whether you worked as a fishmonger in the market or you worked as a professor in university, that the social system was so brightly set up that you could benefit as an individual, you could save. Did they like it? No, they did not. Why? Because if we look at Libyan crude, some of the smoothest crude in the world, what does that mean? That you do not have to, you do not have to refine it to the levels through which other crude must be refined. So everybody wants it. But he had a control of his people. Many would say he flew in the face of human rights. But again, another thing that may have been put together to go against what he was trying to do. Okay. So can we see that can happen?
Have an interjection?
Yes, we can.
First of all, to go back to the whole idea of freedom, like I told you that if we accept the problem, we can have a solution. If you face these people head on, it's like you are under your father's roof and he says no one should return home after 6 p.m. and you are trying to disagree when you don't have economic freedom. So Africa should go and develop themselves in other ways, and then after being economically, financially independent, then you can speak. Like later,
I'm very happy
I could come and tell my father.
We can end the debate now.
No,
because that's my point.
Just wait.
This is what I have been saying this whole time. That because we are not doing, very little outside.
Allow me to
We are
finish.
doing very little outside of what we are being told.
If we accept that
reason.
neocolonialism is the problem, what we need to do is we have to find a way that will give us a platform to fight it head on. But if you fight head on when it is too early, you cannot oppose your father. That's why I had to look for economic freedom, have my own gate. Then I can tell Daddy, your rule number 1, 2, 3 cannot work. But now I'm speaking, then I drive back to my own compound.
We'll take a question from Tony Kwalanda. How many questions?
I have just one question.
Okay.
For Ndu.
Go ahead.
Now, you've mentioned Libya, Ethiopia, and Rwanda in your arguments. I'm thinking poverty is when your people are impoverished, or maybe when you have the gap between the rich and the poor being very huge. Now, Rwanda is a case example of where the gap between the rich and the poor is astronomical, if I can use that term. Now, there is that airport being made or constructed at Bugesera at the tune of about 130 billion, and is being funded by Qatar to a large extent. For your information, the land where that new airport will be is a land that had so many Rwandans who were pushed into more problems by this new development in the name of an airport. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? I think it's astronomical in terms of catastrophe. I do not think that that is the way in which you treat a people in terms of how you want to make sure that the land develops. How are you pushing people out when you're developing infrastructure? But if you're asking how then does this not show that neocolonialism is a thing, is that the Qataris did not walk into the country and have a conversation with other Qataris. They walked into Rwanda and had conversations with the Rwandese government, one would hope, Rwandese technocrats, and they are the ones who acquiesced to this. They are the ones who sat at the table and made decisions on behalf of thousands of Rwandese. They did this. Qataris may have knocked on the door, but who opened it? Qataris may have come and said, well, from my understanding, it is the Belgians and maybe in some part Germans a little bit here and a few of the French who colonized Rwanda in the early times. This neocolonialism that we are talking about, Qatar, other countries with big wallets. But who sat on the other side of the negotiating table? The Rwandese government, Rwandese technocrats.
The big wallet takes away your freedom from this colonialism, neocolonialism, then you do their will because they have the big wallet. We are not free.
And you can say no.
Okay, and maybe to put that example in context, there are situations where the largest social good will actually justify those kind of decisions. So the Rwanda government is not here, so we would possibly give them the benefit of doubt that there is a good justification. Okay. Nerima, your questions now?
Yes, thank you. My first question is to Professor Ogola. And listening to you, I'm thinking about the 1957 Treaty of Rome, which is the European Economic Community. So I can see the West's linkages because of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. However, my question is based upon your idea of not fighting, finding a way around to get toward development in Africa. But there's also the invasion of the East. So in your world, how does neocolonialism work with the East, and what would that look like?
So the main argument here is that if we are not free, the basis of free is what is the issue. So Chinese also just understood, I told you, neocolonialism is not the West like the skin, but is the mindset. And that mindset is what we are not free from. And that's the main issue here. So the Chinese, the East, have just looked and said, whenever you come with money in Africa and tell them, I'll build for you this one, like now the one in Rwanda. If I have a wallet, I determine what happens. I'm sure even for you, Nerima, the wealthiest person in your family, before your father makes the decision, that the one who are consulted. Actually, they participate in the decision. For you can be consulted or you can be informed, but the one who has the biggest wallet has to be actually be able to be participated. That's what we talk about capitalism, which even the system we use in Africa mostly. And capitalism is not an African thing. We are communist by origin because we are living in communities no one wanted and the rest. They disrupted that whole and call it a cake and called it something primitive and left her with their thing which we don't know how to handle. But I'm trying to say that in short, when these East people see, because look at the policy between the East and the West. The West tells you that before they lend you, you must meet these conditions, which looks like they put hot water in a basin and tell you, you jump inside, you won't, isn't it? But the East says they put cold water for a frog to enter, then they start boiling it slowly. That's why Chinese come and give you money without conditions. But when you come to pay, you realize that the water gets hotter and hotter. We have SGR, we have expressway. You see now the impacts. They did the expressway. The road down there was destroyed. They tell us now pay us money to do it because Africans were not clever enough to know this is neocolonialism, to look at it carefully the way we lost. Because how do you lose colonialism battle, then lose neocolonialism? Because we are told, the West came and said, close your eyes, we pray. When we woke up, we had lost everything. Now, neocolonialists, in the name of the East now you mentioned, are doing the same thing. Because the contract signed with these other entities that were doing this infrastructure, so the East is taking advantage because we don't have money, we don't have economic power, and therefore they rule with our wallet. Once we know that, I'll take your money, use it, and then come back and look forward to beat you. They could have used intelligence, not money. Intelligence versus money, intelligence will thrive. But ignorance plus money and competence, you said that money and competence will beat ignorance any day.
All right. Nerima, that was it?
Yes, I have one more question for Madame Du, if it's possible.
Yes, quickly.
You talk about saying no, and I want to be where you are. However, when we look at the continent, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, individuals who said no, and before Libya, Gaddafi was Omar Mukhtar. They have been assassinated. However, when we look at South Africa, Nelson Mandela, who agreed to work with the power that be, managed to lead his own country. Is it truly possible for our leaders to say no, in your view?
Yes, it is. It is possible to say no. Now, it's not just saying no, and this is the thing, that there are certain things that must be done after that. Look, the fight for independence around the first time when colonialism was an issue was bloody. It was terrible. We have the stories today. It's not fun. Saying no is not just something that you say and then you're like a fair weather friend and then you leave. It's not just saying no and going. It's saying no, but there are certain actions that then follow the saying no. It's the entrenchment of the belief. What do you really believe? Nobody wants to say, I mean, goodness gracious. The other day, the Belgians are the ones who are coming and saying sorry to the DRC for what they did to Patrice Lumumba, right? But the things that he said when he said them, are they not remembered until today? What about a situation whereby the things that are being said and the cohort of people around him who understood that what this man is trying to entrench actually becomes the reality? That you don't say no, that you follow up with action. The same thing that I'm talking about today. You come up with a policy, but then we don't implement. Who is holding your neck? You don't show up for work one day and there's certain things that you're supposed to do. Who's holding your neck? I'll give you another example that slaps me in the face every time. October 2019, a school, its buildings fell in Nairobi. We were told that by the 31st of October that year, we would be told about the other schools in the rest of the country that were in a dilapidated state and something would begin to be done about them. That report is not out. Who is standing on whose neck? Who is doing something about it? Who is checking and making sure that these things are actually happening? And that's what I'm saying. Why is it that we can have these great ideas if we are not free in our mind? But then what happens to the implementation? It's going to be bloody, it's going to be terrible. There will be times where it's hard. But are we ready, really, to work on it? And that's my question.
All right. Thank you, Ndu. That brings us to the end of the jury questions. And now I'll give you guys an opportunity to summarize your arguments. We start with you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think that I'm now taking this time to celebrate somebody called Walter Rudney, who was a scholar in this whole sphere. Today, we are celebrating his 37 years since he was murdered. This week, it is 37 years since he was murdered. He is the one who wrote how neocolonialism in Africa has led to underdevelopment. Remember, he was assassinated because of that. And I want to read for you the words that were written by a very famous scholar, which likely, by good luck, is coming from Nigeria, where Ndu comes from. Somebody called Wole Soyinka. He said, in noting Rudney's legacy, Walter Rudney was no captive intellectual playing to the gallery of local or international radicalism. He was clearly one of the most solidly ideologically stimulated intellectual over to look colonialism and exploitation in the eye and, where necessary, spit in the eyes of these colonial. Remember, he was murdered. So you go to Gaddafi, all the stories. Anybody who comes clearly is clear. So colonialism provided Africa with no real growth points. And for instance, a colonial town in Africa was essentially a center of administration, not development. There were no industries in them, and that was a way to plant this poverty that we have today, and we must really see it, that the seeds are here. Towns attracted large numbers of Africans to come, but only to offer them a very unstable life based on unskilled and irregular unemployment. Right. So in that regard, I finish by saying, neocolonialism is not only a Western leaders, but since it is an ideology, there are Africans and East Africans, or we east of the world, who have been brainwashed by colonialists' mindsets who are also colonialists themselves. In fact, the most effective way of colonizing Africa is by using their own to colonize them in their mindset. If you don't agree with the role of neocolonialism in the underdevelopment of Africa, please check again through the mirror. You might be the neocolonialist since you are in the picture, therefore you can't see the whole picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe we are all neocolonialists. All right, Ndu, your closing statement.
It's interesting because I'll use Wole Soyinka's phrase as well, when he said that reinforcing the role of African intellectuals in development is paramount to sorting out the issues that may be faced by neocolonialism and colonialism. He understood, we should all understand, that these issues that face us are not being met by corpses. They are being met by individuals who stand on their feet, who have asked hundreds of millions of people to put them into positions of leadership today. That yes, you will be met by vices that hit you in the face on a regular basis. You will be tempted by funding. You will be tempted by a new, easier way of doing things. You will be tempted by those who, for many reasons, have already conquered the world and would not want to see your development. But they're not met by corpses. They're met by live governments who are ruling and leading over individuals who lead and wait for them to make a choice. And I am saying that neocolonialism, real as it may be, real as it is, in the face of everything that countries deal with on a daily basis, is a factor. It is not the reason that our underdevelopment is at the level at which it is today. We have a role to play, we have a responsibility to shoulder, and there must be something beyond sitting and taking things as they come, as opposed to what we have been doing all this time.
All right. A big thank you to our two debaters. Key insights, a robust debate, much appreciated. At the beginning of this debate, 3 of the jurors were in agreement with you, Professor, that neocolonialism is the reason, and all those jurors were yours to lose and for Ndu to gain. We will now poll the jurors to find out whether you've done enough to hold on or to win the jury members. Let us find out their position.
At the beginning of the debate, 3 jurors were in support of the motion, none was against. Have the debaters managed to win over the jurors with their argument?
Well, the jurors' verdict is in, and at the end of this debate session, 2 of the jury members are in support with the opposition that neocolonialism is not the reason. 1 of the jury members has remained with you, Professor Ogola. So I think, Ndu, you've done quite a bit to win over 2 of the debaters. Well, that's the position of the jury. Do you agree with it? We welcome your feedback and comments on this debate. Please engage with us on our social media handles appearing on your screen right now. That's it for this edition. I thank the 2 debaters, members of the jury team, our location host, the Norfolk Hotel, the KTN team behind this production, and of course you, the viewer, for staying with us and participating in this debate. I am Joe Munene, and we'll see you at the next debate.